welcome to our webinar today. My name is Anam and I'm a developer advocate at IBM. My focus areas are data and AI and web application development. With me today, I have Hashim Noor. Hashim, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Anam, for your introduction. My name is Hashim, and I'm a client technical specialist at IBM. And my focus areas are artificial intelligence and blockchain. And good to see you all here today.
All right. Thank you, Hashim. This is our survey that you can take at any time for us. And let us know what you think about the webinar, what we can improve, what you would like to see in the future, and how we are doing. So you can scan the QR code. We will also put the link in the chat. And you can also find the link in the workshop resources as well. So give us your feedback and we will look into that. Now, for some housekeeping, so this is basically the page that you are looking at right now. And on the top left corner, you have the title of the webinar. If you click on the I button right here, you can find more information about the event. You can follow us on Cloudcast using IBM Developer Follow, and every time we go live, you will be notified about it. And you can also find our upcoming events here. Now, in the chat section, you can chat with everyone, chat with the presenters as well, and you can post your questions right here, and we will answer them for you. Then there will be a poll questions as well. So don't forget to answer the poll questions in the poll section. Lastly, we have is the workshop resources button right here, and from here you will find you will be taken to a GitHub repository on which you will find all the resources that you need and step-by-step guide to the hands-on session that Hashim will be conducting. So for the agenda, we will be talking about AI versus ML versus DL, introduction to AI, how AI is changing, some of the use cases of AI, and how can you adopt a responsible AI, and then building the AI pipeline, tackling bias in AI, and then again the how the AI pipeline works, which will then be followed by the demo by Hashim. Now let's get started with our webinar for today. So often nowadays we often hear the word AI, ML, DL, artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, and sometimes we also confuse each of them by with one another. But what exactly is the difference between these terminologies that we hear all around? So in brief, AI tries to make computers intelligent in order to mimic the cognitive functions of humans. So artificial intelligence is a general field with a broad scope, including computer vision, language processing, creativity, and summarization. And machine learning is the branch of AI that covers the statistical part of artificial intelligence. It teaches the computer to solve problems by looking at hundreds or thousands of examples, learning from them, and then using that experience to solve the same problem in new situation. And deep learning is a very special field of machine learning where computers can actually learn and make intelligent decisions on their own. And deep learning involves a deeper level of automation in comparison to most machine learning algorithms. Now, if we look a little deeper into AI, artificial intelligence is about teaching the machines to learn and act as humans would. Another dimension is really about how can we get the machines to impart more of the cognitive and sensory capabilities, right? So it's about analyzing images, videos, natural language processing, understanding speech, and pattern recognition. So basically, we're trying to put more of the cognitive and sensory capabilities that we humans have into the machines. And the capabilities of artificial intelligence are not hidden. The intelligence of machines is undergoing a major transformation by continuous self learning and improvements. However, these AI models are still a black box, and their decisions are often questioned by the clients. The research is moving faster than ever on improving and optimizing the algorithms, but this alone won't suffice, right? And the conversations around building trust on AI are often a point of interest for developers, sales, and marketing teams. Basically, everyone who is directly working with clients. Therefore, it's important to look into it. And the application of AI algorithms in domains such as criminal justice, credit scoring, hiring holds unlimited promise. At the same time, it raises legitimate concerns about algorithmic fairness. AI systems are deciding everything from which resumes are considered to which insurance claims will be accepted to whose mortgage loan gets approved and even who receives a payroll. So, we need to be very careful when making these decisions through AIs because let's look at some of the examples of bias in AI that surfaced. And so, one example is that Apple credit card ran into major problems when users noticed that it seemed to offer smaller lines of credit to women than men. Amazon created a hiring tool that started discriminating against women. So that this is why it's really important because we need to guard against the misapplication of race, gender, religion, or other characteristics in the decisions that AI systems make. It's often a question of legality, but it's also a question of basic fairness. So it's very important that we adopt responsible AI. There are different ways you can do that, and here are some. First of all, you can have a diverse team to do better. So organizations with diverse teams have tend to do better with ensuring diverse representation in their data and AI pipeline and avoiding bias altogether. Next is having a culture of accountability. Teams must ensure that there are AI practitioners on their AI team to ensure that the five focal points are covered. And we'll discuss about that in the few coming up slides. Next, we have design thinking. So, we need to make use of design thinking with the user in mind, with the end user in mind, and understanding their needs and pain points and designing what is usable to the user. So now, again, this comes back to the point that if you have a diverse team, this helps you get more better in gets you more input during the design thinking workshops, right? And next is you can make use of open source tools and open source and commercial tools and understand fairness and explainability. And all these can help us adopt responsible AI because if we are not responsible, then let's take an example of self driving cars. There's a lot of ethical questions that are emerging that people are worried about. For example, if the car has to decide which accident to cause, if it has to pick between running into a sign and hurting passengers in the vehicle or running into pedestrians on the side of the road but potentially saving the passengers. How do we make these decisions? So it's really interesting area and with a lot of open questions and it's unclear how we can properly define regulations so that different companies that are producing these vehicles all behave in consistent ethical manner that meets our expectation. Another example is if you imagine owning a computer vision company that builds AI classification models for people in the healthcare industry to diagnose cancer using MRIs, CT scans, and X rays, it can be difficult for a doctor to rely on the diagnosis suggested by an AI model when a person's life is involved. Therefore, building trusted AI pipeline that has become increasingly important within AI applications. And trusted AI pipelines means you have to give an explanation of what your AI is doing and how it is doing, right? That is really important for in the industry. So, how do we build trusted AI pipelines? We need to take into consideration robustness, fairness, explainability. Now, robustness measures the stability of the algorithm performance when a model that is deployed in the real world is attacked and noise is introduced in the training data. It characterizes how effective your algorithm is while being tested on the new independent but similar dataset. This ensures that the algorithm of the model is able to handle the unseen perturbated data. It addresses the questions of estimating uncertainties in its predictions and whether the model is robust. Now, there is a library called ART, and it is dedicated to adversarial machine learning. Its purpose is to allow rapid crafting and analysis of attacks, defense, and detection methods from machine learning models. And applicable domains include finance, self-driving vehicles, and the adversarial robustness toolbox provides an implementation for many state-of-the-art methods for attacking and defending classifiers. Now, when we move to fairness, unfair bias can exist in the data used to train the model as well as in the model's own decision-making algorithm. The fairness emphasizes the identification and tackling of such biases. There are that are introduced in the data. So this ensures that the model's predictions are fair and do not unethically discriminate anyone. Now, for fairness, we have an open source library called AIF360, which we will be using today for in the hands-on session. And this library, it helps to detect and remove bias in machine learning models. AI Fairness 360 translates algorithmic research from the lab into practice, and the applicable domains for this is finance, human capital, management, healthcare, and education, and basically anywhere where you can think that discrimination can take place. And AI Fairness 360 is a Python package which has a comprehensive set of metrics for datasets and models to test for biases, explanation for these metrics, and algorithms to mitigate bias in datasets and models. So that explanation is really important because that's what we're trying to remove. We need the AI to be transparent and not a black box anymore. So AI fairness has about 70 plus fairness metrics and explanations, and it has about 10 plus bias mitigation algorithms. When we come to explainability, we have now explainability shows how a machine learning model makes its predictions. It gives an improved understanding of the model by clarifying how the model works. It is essential to data scientists for detecting, avoiding, and removing its failure nodes, to SMEs and customers for earning public trust in the algorithm, and for introducing effective policies to regulate the technology. Now, AI, so for explainability, we have again another open source library called AIX360 that can help explain AI and machine learning models and their predictions. This includes three classes of algorithms, which is local post hoc, global post hoc, and directly interpretable explainers for models that use image, text, and structured or tabular data. So now artificial intelligence is becoming a crucial component of enterprises' operations and strategies. And accordingly, there are now growing demand for fairness, accountability, and transparency for machine learning systems. And we need to remember that training data isn't the only source of possible bias. It can also be introduced through inappropriate data handling, inappropriate model selection, or incorrect algorithm design. Now, bias can also affect usage data. What we need is a comprehensive bias pipeline that fully that fully integrates into the AI lifecycle. And such a pipeline requires a robust set of checkers, debiasing algorithms, and bias explanations. And this is needed because we need to give our clients the confidence they need to responsibly take advantage of AI today, We must figure out ways to instill transparency, explainability, fairness, and robustness into AI. And these are the five ethical focal areas. Starting with accountability. Accountability is a human judgment plays a role throughout a seemingly objective system of logical decisions. It is humans who write the algorithms, who define success or failure, who make decisions about the uses of systems, and who may be affected by a system's outcome. Now, every person involved in the creation of AI at any step is accountable for considering the system's impact in the world, as are the companies invested in its development. With value alignment, AI works alongside human interest, and people make decisions based on any number of contextual factors, including their experiences, memories, upbringing, and cultural norms. Now, these factors allow us to have a judgment, have a fundamental understanding of right and wrong in a wide range of contexts, such as at home, in the office, or elsewhere. And this is the second nature for humans, as we have a wealth of experiences to draw upon. Now, today's AI systems do not have these types of experiences to draw upon. So, it is the job of the designers and developers to collaborate with each other in order to ensure a consideration of existing values. Care is required to ensure sensitivity of the wide range of cultural norms and values. And this again ties back to the point where we talked about how we need to have diverse teams to mitigate all of this. Now, moving on to explainability, in general, we don't buy, in general, human nature is that we don't generally blindly trust those who cannot explain their reasoning. And the same goes for AI and perhaps even more. So, as AI increases in capabilities and achieves a greater range of impact, its decision making process should be explainable in terms people can understand. Explainability is key for user interacting and AI to understand the AI's conclusions and recommendations. So users should always be aware that they are interacting with an AI, and good design does not sacrifice transparency in creating a seamless experience. So whenever you create an AI, you should not try to hide the fact that the user is talking to an AI. You should let the users know that they are talking to AI, because that is one of the rules that says that transparency should be there. Now, fairness is AI provides deeper insight into our personal lives when interacting with our sensitive data. As humans are inherently vulnerable to biases and are responsible for building AI, there are chances for human bias to be embedded in the systems we create. And it is the role of a responsible team to minimize algorithmic bias through ongoing research and data collection, which is representative of a diverse population. Next, very important is user data rights. AI must be designed to protect the user data and preserve the user's power over access and users. It is the team's responsibility to keep users empowered with control over their interaction. Now, the percentage of people who feel that having control of their information is very important, and that it is unacceptable for companies to use the user information without permission, now, that number is going to rise as AI is further used to either amplify our privacy or undermine it. Now the company you are working with or whatever it is should be fully compliant with the applicable portions of EU's GDPR, which is General Data Protection Regulation, or any other comparable regulation in other countries, to make sure users understand that AI is working in their best interest, right? Now, designers and developers of AI can help mitigate bias and disenfranchisement by practicing these five areas of ethical considerations. Heard me mention AI pipeline, but how does the AI pipeline work? Now, in our portfolio, there are four key pillars that can be mixed and matched with other solutions in the market, depending on your need. And when you come to the organizing and governing side, we have Watson Knowledge Catalog. Now, this helps you catalog all your data into one place, so you understand your data and you know where it is. It also helps clients understand who is accessing the data and control permissions. When you move to the next part, we have Watson Studio. Now, Watson Studio is like the one data science platform where you can bring your data into the platform, process it, build it, deploy your models, run, and then operate it. So let's look at the different sections in Watson Studio. So when it comes to the build phase, it actually is actually wanting to look into your data, prep it, and build some models or dashboards that can give you predictive insight into your data. And so this is where you use data exploration. Next, once you have your models built, the next step is to deploy those models into production. So once this is done, you move into production and to use the output predictions to influence business decisions. And it's made very easy with machine learning. So you have inside Watson Studio, you have machine learning, and you can use that to deploy your models. So now you have the governance, you have the governance, you've built the model and you've deployed it. Now you're getting the predictions for whom you should give a loan or who should you market to. But the natural question is, do you trust the output of the model? Do you trust its decision? How do you make sure the model isn't biased by the person who built it? And this is where the model explainability comes in. So it now model explainability will help clients understand how the model is making decisions or the logic can be traced. You can see the features the model is giving you, predictions of, and you can retrain your model based on key metrics that you specify. So now if you take a step back, you can see that these solutions fulfill the whole end-to-end journey. It is very easy to deploy, manage, and monitor your models, which goes back to the team sport strategy. All these things work together very seamlessly. Pick specific pieces. You can bring them together to complete your data science and AI journey. Now that we know the pillars of trustworthy AI, but we need to test them too. The pillars of trustworthy AI have mitigation approaches grouped into the same three categories. The first category contains pre-processing methods that improve the statistics of the training data set, and the second category constrains the training of the AI in favorable ways, and the third category is post processes, the predictions produced by the AI. And mitigation methods are fully fledged AI algorithms themselves. The main goal of these algorithms is to adapt the data to better match the desired world and to make AI model perform the best as it can in the worst case scenario. So now I'd like to hand it over to Hashim for the demo. And in that, you will see how AI Fairness 360 will work. So, and all these three things that I mentioned, pre-processing and post-processing, you will see how these work with AI Fairness 360. Hashim, over to you.
All right, hello again, everyone, and thank you, Anam, for the background on IBM AI fairness and all the techniques that we can use to build fair and ethical models. In today's hands-on session, we will be taking a look at a code lab where we will be running a Jupyter notebook, uh, and which will demonstrate how what's the difference between having a bias in a data set and processing a data set without a bias, right? So let us get started. However, before we begin, I want to ask you all to register for IBM Cloud account. The link to register for the IBM Cloud will already be shared in the chat by my colleague Anam. For those of you who have already signed registered for IBM Cloud, you can go ahead and use your IBM Cloud account to sign in, and again, the link will be shared in the chat. All right. So, however, before this, I want to quickly take you through the GitHub repository for the webinar today. In today's webinar, we will be using a GitHub repository uh, for the mitigation of bias in machine learning, and you all will need to clone this repository because there are some data sets in it which we will be using. So you can use the terminal to git clone the repository using this command, or you can go ahead and download the zipped file. I already have the zip file downloaded on my desktop, which I will be using for the purpose of the webinar today. All right, so let me go ahead and sign into IBM Cloud, and I want you all to follow along this tutorial with me. And it'll be helpful if you can post on the chat as you progress through the tutorial, so I know where to stop, where to take a break, and go over something that you guys need more explanation on. All right, so let me copy paste the link. This is the link which will also be available on the chat, and you'll be using this link to register or sign into your IBM Cloud account. I will copy and paste this on my URL screen, and it will open up IBM Cloud. I already have an IBM Cloud account, so instead of registering, I will simply click on the login. For those of you who do not have an IBM Cloud account, you can simply add your email address, password, verify that email, and you will have access to IBM Cloud. It's the access is completely free for 30 days, so don't worry, you don't need to enter any sort of credit card information or anything of that sort. All right, so I'll go over here and click on login, and I will use my personal email to log into IBM Cloud. I'll enter my email, and then I'll be prompted for my password. And once I do that, I will be into the IBM Cloud account. All right, now I understand that some people might still be registering for IBM Cloud, so I'm just going to take a quick pause over here and talk a little bit about the dashboard, and also perhaps address some of the questions in the chat. For those of you who have any questions, not just, I mean, at any point throughout the webinar, please feel free to post them on the chat, and either me or my colleague Anam will answer those questions. All right, so this is the IBM Cloud dashboard, and over here you will be able to see a summary of all the resources that you have created. Currently, since I don't have anything running, this page is pretty much empty. However, if once you create any services, they'll be visible over here. And if you click on the three lines over here, you'll be able to see all the services that you have access to, which you can use to create AI, data science, blockchain applications. Now, let me go and in today's webinar, we'll be using the IBM Watson Studio service. Actually, let me go over the architecture for the webinar today and show you what services we'll be using. I think this will be better. So in today's webinar, we'll be using the IBM Watson Studio service, which we will link to the object storage, where we'll store the data sets and the notebooks that we'll be leveraging. And then in turn, Watson Studio will use AI fairness algorithm in order to detect the biases in the data set, and then give and sort of give us a comparison of what would have been the outcome if we would not have used the AI fairness algorithm as compared to now that we are using the AI fairness algorithm.
Hashim, sorry to interrupt, but can you please zoom in?
Sure. Is it better now?
Yes. Just hold for a minute since because the screen is like adjusting. So and then proceed.
Okay. All right. Now, before we proceed, I just want you guys to give me a thumbs up or, just put one or something in the chat if you have completed the first step, which was to register for IBM Cloud. I'll just wait for your comments on the chat. All right. I'm beginning to see some comments in the chat. All right. So I will, in that case, I will proceed with the next step, which is to create a Watson Studio service. It's pretty simple how we create a Watson Studio service. We'll just search for Watson Studio over here, and we'll see the service instance over here. I encourage you all to follow along in the hands-on session for today because we'll be using Jupyter Notebooks, and it's generally a good technology to get some hands-on experience on. So for those of you who haven't already logged into IBM Cloud, please go ahead and do so and follow along. All right, so I'll just click on the privacy agreement over here and click on create, which will then start up my Watson Studio service. This is the homepage for Watson Studio. I can click on get started. Let's just give it a few minutes to load. It's going to ask me for some information. I'm just going to provide my phone number and company name and click on continue. I already have Watson Studio selected, so I don't need to provide anything else over here. I'll just click on continue and just wait for the service to load. Once all of this information is completed, I'll see a go to IBM Watson Studio button. I just click on that and it will take me to Watson Studio. All right, let me zoom in into the screen a little bit. I hope the visibility is a bit better. Now, now that I have created a Watson Studio instance, I can go ahead and create a new project. So for that, I'll click on create a project button over here. And it will show me two options. The first one is to create an empty project or to create a project from a sample file or folder. I will select the option of creating a project from an empty folder. I'll select the first option, and over here it will ask me to enter the name of the project and to add a storage device. Now I want to take a pause over here and see if everyone's following along, and I want to also ask Anam if the screen is visible clearly. If do I need to zoom in a little bit or is it fine?
Yeah, it's much better now after you zoomed in.
Okay, all right, that's good. All right, so let me go ahead and continue with the creation of the project. You can name this project anything. I'll just name it AI Fairness Demo. And now I need to associate an instance of IBM Cloud service where the data will be stored. Someone is saying that they are a little bit confused. The first step so let me just reiterate what we have done up till now. The first step that we did was to create an IBM Cloud account. by going to the link that was shared on the chat. And after creating the cloud account, we created an instance of the Watson Studio service by simply searching for it on from the search bar. And after creating the Watson Studio service, for some people, it might ask you for some more verification information, such as your company name or your phone number. For those of you who do not have a company, for those of your students, you can just write student over there and click on continue. This information is just required for verification purposes, so don't worry, it won't be needed in the hands-on session for today. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and create the cloud object storage service. I'll click on create. And now in this step, what we are doing is we are just creating a project and we are associating a storage service with it. And what that basically helps us do is that in this storage service, uh, this is where we'll be storing all the data sets and the notebooks that we'll be creating. And finally, we'll go ahead and click on create. And this will load and this takes some time to provision. And in the meantime, if for those of you who haven't cloned or downloaded the GitHub repository over here yet, please go ahead and do so. My colleague will have already shared the link to the GitHub repository on the chat. You can clone the repository by downloading it from here or using the git clone method. All right, let me go back to okay. Let me try again, no worries. All right, hopefully this time it will work. Yes, it does work. Okay, so now that the project has created, for now, for those of you, again, who, if anyone faces an error while creating the project or creating an instance of Watson Studio, uh, just refresh your page. And for those of you who have already created a Watson Studio service, please note that on the Lite account, you can only create one instance of service at the time. So if you have already created a Watson Studio service, you'll either have to delete that or use a different Cloud Lite account. All right, so now that I have created the project, what I need to do is I need to upload the data sets that we downloaded from the GitHub repository. And for that, we'll go on into assets. We'll go into assets and on the right hand side we'll see the browse button over here. Now you can either upload your repository by the data set by clicking on the browse button and navigating to the folder and then uploading it, or you can simply drag and drop the data over here. I'll choose the option for dragging and dropping the data. I have my GitHub repository cloned over here. I'll go to the data folder, go to the assets, and these are the two files that we need to that we'll be using in the tutorial today. Let me quickly go over these files and show them what they look like. Fraud underscore data, this is the data set that we'll be using in the tutorial today, which will be analyzing and mitigating the biases from this data set. And this data set, for those of you who have joined in our previous webinars, this is a data set that we used uh, to create a model to determine the eligibility of the people who applied for a bank loan. Now, and as you can see, there is a column over here which predicts which people are at the risk of defaulting or not. So this is the data set that we'll be using, and we'll be using our IBM AI Fairness 360 library in order to sort of detect biases in this algorithm, in this data set, and to see, if there is any group of individuals that is being favored over the other. All right. So with that being said, let me go ahead and copy these files over here. It just takes some time to load, so let us give it a couple of minutes. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please post them on the chat, and I will either me or Anam will answer those questions. All right. So once you upload the data, you will be able to see it over here on the left hand side of your screen. You'll be able to see it under the data assets page. I hope you all are following along and are able to and have completed the step. For those of you who have missed out a couple of steps here and there, please post it on the chat so that I can reiterate and you are up to speed with everything that's happening. All right, I'll just take a pause over here to check the chat if we have any questions. I don't see any questions, but if you have any, please post them on the chat. So is everyone following along? It would be nice if you guys can give me a thumbs up on the chat. Uh, all right, that's good. Khalid is saying he's on track. Good to hear that. Okay, so let me continue on with the tutorial then. Where to hit create project? Okay, so there's a question over here. So once you create IBM Watson Studio, once you create an instance of the Watson Studio service, you will see a option of create project, right? So once you click on create project, you'll be on this screen where you can then upload your assets and so on, right? So once you create an instance of the Watson Studio service, you can click on get started, and then after that you'll be able to create an empty project. I'll just also reiterate the steps as to what we have done up till now. Number one thing, we logged into our IBM Cloud account. The second thing we did, we created an instance of the Watson Studio service by searching in the search panel. By typing Watson Studio in the search panel over here, we were able to create an instance of the Watson Studio service. The next thing we did was to create a project in Watson Studio. We clicked on create project, and this led us to this page that we are on currently. And then the current step that we are on which is to upload the data sets, for which we went to assets and then uploaded the data sets which were present in the GitHub repository. Now all of these steps are also mentioned in the GitHub repository, so if you at any point, if you're a bit lost, you can refer to the GitHub repository also. All right, now to move on to the next step, which is to add the notebooks to this project. And these are the notebooks that we'll be using to demonstrate how we to demonstrate the bias, and then show the difference between the data set where there is a bias and when there is no bias. So click on add to project and then click on notebook. And over here we'll be using a Jupyter Notebook. For those of you who haven't worked with Jupyter Notebooks it's an open source web application that allows you to create and share documents that contain live code, equations, or visualizations, and you can use them to perform operations such as data cleaning, transformation, numerical solutions, and so on. So yeah, it's a pretty good tool amongst data scientists these days, and it's being used quite heavily these days. So yeah, that's why it's good to explore that a little bit. Or All right, so over here in this option, we'll click from URL, because I already have a notebook uploaded in my GitHub repository, so I'll be using that. We'll be using three notebooks: one for pre-processing, one for in-processing, and one for post-processing. I won't get into too much details. This will hopefully get clear as we go along. So let me type the name of the first notebook that I want to upload, which is going to be pre-processing. And this notebook basically will allow us to discover and also mitigate biases that can be found in the pre-processing phase. in the data science in the data science pipeline. So before we actually start processing data, if there is any biases that can occur in the data set, it will help us in overcome that. Now the link to this notebook is present in the GitHub repository. So I'll quickly go to the GitHub repository and copy the notebook that the link to the notebook that is here. I'll paste the notebook URL over here and click on create. All right, for those of you who are just joining us, we created an IBM Cloud account, we created an instance of the Watson Studio service, and we uploaded some data sets in the Watson Studio service, and then and now we are creating our notebook. All of these steps are mentioned in the GitHub repository, so you can follow along the tutorial by going to the GitHub repository and going over those steps step by step. Now, let us give it a few minutes for the notebook to load. All right, now that the notebook is loaded, let me just quickly go over the notebook and show you what it is. So as I said, these notebooks are fairly popular these days, and they contain code snippets which you can run and see some visualizations that will be generated as a result of running those code snippets, right? So, and at the end of all of that, we'll be able to see the discrepancy or the bias that would have resulted if you would have used the data set as is instead of using the AI fairness library. So now the first step that we need to do in order to run this notebook is to import the credentials. Uh, and in order to do that, we'll click on the 0100 button over here, and we will uh, we will go to this zipped folder over here and click on credentials. Right now, as you'll see, there are like sort of two two instances of credentials over here. We only need one, so we can remove one and remove this extra curly brace as well and name this credentials. Right, so once again, very simply, we just went to this pipeline in label encoder, and we imported the credentials in the first cell over here. And once that's done, we'll scroll down a little bit. We'll come to line number 8, and there's this small thing in the code which we need to remove. So this less than 2 will remove that. This is just due to some changes in the in the versions of TensorFlow that we'll be using. And lastly, we need to incorporate pandas data frame, which is a visualization library which will help us visualize data that we are using. I'll select this is the place. You'll see the heading over here where you need to insert the pandas data frame. So this is the instance where we need to do that. So I'll select all of this code which is already written, and I'll remove that, and I will click on pandas data frame and insert it. Once that's done, I'll change this to df because that's the variable name that we are using. Now, so what we did is we imported the service credentials, which will help us connect to the AI fairness library, right? That was the first step. Then we imported the pandas library, which will help us with visualizations. And now what we have in our notebook is that we have integrated it with the AI fairness library through the credentials which we added in the first part and we have also integrated it with pandas, which will help us see visualizations in the data. Now what we can do is we can run this entire notebook and see what we get as an outcome, right? So we can go over here click on kernel, and actually, sorry, no, not kernel, click on cell and click on run all, right? So for those of you who are here at this step, I want you all to click on cell and click on run all, and this will sort of run the notebook one by one step at a time. And for the, if you see the star in this in the square bracket over here, it means this is the cell which is being run over here. And if you see a number, it means that the cell has already run. So, and if there are any errors in that come up in the notebook, it will prompt you for that. Okay, so I had an error over here which says fair learn. Okay, no module fair learn, no worries. We can just simply run it again. If there are any errors, rerun that cell and hopefully the error will be resolved. Let me run this once again. And okay, here we go. Here we have the final outcome for the here we have the final outcome for the prediction of the biases. And let me go over that and show you what
Hashim, before you move, can you please show what you edited in line 4? We have a question from Khalid.
line 4. Okay, so what I removed is there was this less than 2 in this line. I removed that. If you have not done that, that's okay. That's not an issue. You can still go ahead and run the notebook. And if you face any errors, you can post that on the chat and I'll address it. Right. So even if you haven't changed that, it's fine. You can go ahead and click on cell and click on run all to run the notebook. And then if you find any error, let me know. I'll go ahead and fix that for you. All right. So let me go and show you the output of what. Before that, I'll just quickly go over this as well. So this is the this visualization that we are seeing is because through the pandas library that we imported over here. um, and 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 all of this data that we have generated is shown over here. If you go to the final step, we will see that this was the data before we without using the AI fairness algorithm. And if we see the difference in the outcomes between the privileged and the unprivileged groups, it was 37%, right? So there was a 37% chance of a bias of this data set being biased, right? But then we, using the AI fairness library by IBM, we sort of recalibrated it, and after running that, running the data set, we can see that the difference between the privileged and the unprivileged groups was reduced to 0%. This is in the pre-processing stage, right? So this notebook that we just went over is that shows the bias that can occur in data in the pre-processing stage, which is before we have started sort of working with the data. We also have post in processing and post processing, and we'll go ahead and import those notebooks as well. For those of you who are having trouble following us, I would uh, there is my colleague shared a link to the GitHub repository. You can go through it and follow all the steps step by step. Um, uh, Now we'll upload the new notebook for in processing and post processing. For that, I'll click on the new notebook over here. I'll follow the same steps, which is from URL. I'll type the name of the notebook in processing and select the URL, which will be available in the GitHub repository. And I'll click on create, which will create my notebook. Right, so again you'll see that this is the notebook has loaded. Now I need to do the same thing for the post-processing notebook. Okay, I'll just wait for it to save this notebook. Once the notebook is saved, I can go back and create another one. I'll click on the link for my project. I'll go to assets, click on new notebook, click on for URL, and go to post processing. And again, I have the URL for the notebook over here. So I'll select that, paste it over here, click on create. And in this fashion, 3 of my notebooks are created. And now I can understand this can be a bit overwhelming to follow. So let me go reiterate as to what we have done now, and a good recap for people who are just joining us. So what we did, the first step was to create a Watson Studio service, and basically what we are trying to achieve is we are looking at a data set which is the fraud detection data set, and we are trying to determine how traditional machine learning algorithms, when they churn out their predictions, can those predictions be biased as well, right? So this is what we are trying to uncover in this hands-on session, and for that we are using this fraud detection data set. And we have these 3 notebooks which are going to show us what is the probability of the data set, the machine learning algorithm giving us a biased prediction by going over this data set. And then we also show how much of that bias can be reduced when we use the IBM AI library, which we integrated in the first notebook, right? So this, we up till now we have run we completed the pre-processing notebook, right, where we imported the notebook, and then we uh, integrated it using the service credentials, and then we ran the notebook, and we saw a difference where a traditional machine learning algorithm would give you a 30 was had a 37% chance of the prediction being biased, right? So this, we'll do the same thing for in processing and post processing, right? Instead of now, since we are short of time, I already have this sort of note this the outputs already running in a different cloud account, so I'll just go to that and show you how those look like. First, I'll go to the in processing one. For those of you who have uploaded the notebooks over along with me, you can follow the same steps. The steps are the same. You just need to import the service credentials, and then go scroll down and service the and import the pandas data frame, and just run the notebook, right? And you can do that by, I'll show you in a bit how you can run the notebook, and I'll do it along with you as well. And again, all of these steps are mentioned in the GitHub repository. So for those of you who are having trouble following us, you can refer to the steps in the GitHub repository. All right, let's give it a few seconds for this notebook to load. All right, now that this notebook is loaded, I'm going to show you how to run it. Click on cell and click on run all. And this will basically run this entire notebook, and it will show you, this notebook is for the in processing stage, and it will show you the prediction, right, as to if there was any chance of it being biased, uh, and how we can help uh, mitigate that. Right, so after running the notebook, I think there is an error because I don't see the output over here. Okay, again the same thing. If so, for the cells that give us an error, that you'll most probably see an error over here, and you can, if you run it again, it will most probably be fine. And if not, it's the errors are fairly easy to debug. You can also refer back to the GitHub where we have mentioned how you can go over such things, and you can also post it on the chat. Okay, so over here you'll see uh, the final outcome. uh, so you'll see that the differences between without debiasing and with debiasing, right? So you see that there is a very clear there's a visible difference over here, right? So in the outcome, it was up to the main differences between the privileged groups and the unprivileged groups over here was 52%, and over here it's down to 35%, right? And again over here you'll see that the impact is 34% over here, and over here it's fairly reduced, right? Uh, so naturally, once you are using the AI fairness toolkit, you see a reduction in the amount of in the percentage chance of there being a bias in the data set that you're running. Now this was for the in processing phase. Now finally we have the post processing phase. So I'll go back to my project and show you how you can go ahead and run that. I'll go to post processing. Now there's a question in the chat which someone's asking, how would you add a bias if you found it? Oh, so I think that what you're referring to is the fact that if you discover a parameter which might cause a bias, how would you incorporate for that? See, so the good part is in this tutorial we're using the AI Fairness Toolkit, and it consists the algorithms in the Fairness Toolkit. They take care of all of these sort of variables which might cause a bias in the data and the predictions. So you don't need to worry about that, and you can simply use the library given, and it will sort of mitigate the bias in the AI model, right? So the last thing that we have now is the post processing stage, where I'll click on the pen icon in order to edit the notebook. And once that's done, since I already imported the credentials over here, I don't need to do that again. If you are loading the notebook from scratch, you'll have to import the credentials, but you can do it uh, very simply as we did it in the first part. So I'm just going to simply go ahead and click on run all and wait for the predictions, which I will get. If there's any error, then this star will change to a blank cell. Uh, if if you see a blank cell, you can tell that there's an error somewhere. And by now, I think I have a good idea of what the error is going to be. I'll just quickly go and run this again, and the error will go away. Okay, I'll run this one again, and I'll be able to see the output in a bit. All right, here we go. So over here, we'll finally see a graph in which shows us the disparity between the data if we would have processed it without mitigating the bias and after mitigating the bias. So you can see that the difference is huge over here, right? Almost it's 30% difference, it's between the if we if it's if we run the AI fairness toolkit and not. So there's a huge disparity between the predictions and that are churned out, and this is because of the bias in the data set, and which traditional machine learning algorithms would not pick up, But since in this tutorial specifically we are using the AI Fairness Toolkit, that it sort of detects the biases and makes sure that it mitigates it when before giving us the final outcome. So that was pretty much it for the three notebooks that we had to run. Before handing it over to my colleague Anam for closing, I'll just quickly go over what we did. And so, in case if anyone wants to follow along, they can go ahead and do that on their own as well. So, in today's webinar, we spoke about the AI Fairness 360 library on Watson Studio, and this library basically helps us detect and prevent biases in our data sets. And in order to use that, first we have to follow this. We have to follow the for the tutorial today. We followed these 7 steps where we created our IBM Cloud account. We created a new Watson Studio project. We added the data. We created the notebook, and we integrated it with the AI Fairness Toolkit. And then we ran the notebook, and were able to see the disparity in the results which were churned out, right? So if we would have no so we saw that in the pre-processing stage, there was a 37% of chance of unprivileged groups being favored over the unprivileged groups. And after mitigating the biases, it reduced to 0%. And in the pre-processing, in the in-processing stage, we saw that the bias reduced from 17% to 3%, which is again it's a huge reduction, and the bias was almost removed. And in the post-processing stage, we saw the difference, the huge disparity between uh, the data when we process it uh, without taking account the biases, and when we do it when taking into account the biases that can be present. So yeah, that's basically it. Now, for those of you who had trouble following along, please make sure that you go to the GitHub repository and follow this tutorial step by step. And uh, and uh, yeah, I hope you enjoyed the session, and if you have any questions, please feel free to post them on the chat. And please feel free to post them on the chat, and me or my colleague will do our best to answer your questions. And with that, I will leave the floor for my colleague Anand to close.
Thank you, Hashim, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Just to summarize on what we did today. So we talked about artificial intelligence and how we are trying to get more of the sensory capabilities that humans have into machines. And then we talked about how ethics is the new muscle we all need to develop. We then discussed about robustness, which measures the stability of the algorithm. We talked about fairness, which is unfair bias can exist in the data and how we can mitigate that. We talked about explainability, and that shows how machine learning models make its predictions, and they also explain those predictions. We talked about data privacy and how users need to know that the AI is working in their favor, in their best interest. We need to be transparent about AI. When you create an AI, you don't need to hide the fact that a user is interacting with an AI, but in fact, that the user is interacting with an AI. We talked about the five focus areas of tackling bias in AI, which was accountability. Everyone who is working on creating an AI is accountable. We talked about value alignment, and we talked about explainability, fairness. Again, user data rights. We need to get permission before we can actually use the user data for other to pass to next levels or anything. And we talked about the AI pipeline. We talked about what's in knowledge catalog, and then we talked about Watson Studio. We also demonstrated about Watson Studio and its capabilities, how you can create models in it, how you can create notebooks in it. You can link all your services together to create an end-to-end journey for your data science and AI projects. And everyone in the technology, in the tech related to AI, is accountable and needs to build responsible and ethical AI systems. It's our responsibility. And that's it. Some of the useful links we will be sending out and follow up email after the session is over from, and you can find all of these links and other useful resources in that follow-up email. Don't forget to fill out the survey form. Here is the QR code that you can scan, and you can reach out to us on our emails. I did see a few people mentioning that they are still lost, and this seems to be something new for them. So if you have difficulty, you can always reach out to us on our email. We will be sending that in the follow-up email as well. So if you are interested, you can send us an email, and we will get back to you with uh, with uh, with your questions or queries that you have. And if anything else, you can always visit the GitHub repository that we have. With it has all the steps that you need to follow along. But still, if you need any help, please feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn or as on our emails. And lastly, don't forget to give us your feedback on the survey. It's a very short survey that you can fill out. And please use the link that was provided to you for your IBM Cloud accounts. As Hashim mentioned earlier, this will help you get a 30-day free trial account to play around with IBM Cloud services. And you can enjoy the services for then. And I think that's it from our side. I did see a question that said, what is a biased data set? So basically, a biased data set is when a when there are fields, or if there is any data that can discriminate against race, gender, or anything, any characteristic that can discriminate people based on certain characteristics. And when a data set is biased, it will not give you the correct predictions. Like I said in one of the examples, in the use case that we looked at for AI, that Amazon created a hiring tool that was discriminating against women. So it preferred hiring male over women. So that's one example. So so these kind of biases that we might not see exist in database in our data sets, and we need to remove these biases to have a fair chance for everyone to be taken into considerations. So for example, for fraud, if you consider, so maybe someone whose bank account might not have enough salary in it, they might be considered as a high risk of fraud, and that might not be a true case, right? You need to look at a lot of other options, such as their credit history and all that information from the bank, to make such comments about a person. So removing bias is very important. Yeah, of course, married or not is one of the other fields. It's not supposed to make a difference, right? Marriage is not a field that should be considered, and if it's there, it can be considered as bias. So all these kind of fields that exist in the data set can cause our data set to make our models basically to create a biased prediction, and this is what we need to remove. We need to take away that characteristics from the data set that can discriminate against people, right? So I hope this makes sense, and if there is anything else, you can post them in the chat. We will answer them, or you can reach out to us on our email, and we'll be more happy to answer your questions. Don't forget to fill out the survey. It really matters to us. And please use the link for IBM Cloud account to sign up to IBM Cloud account for a 30-day free trial. If you already have an IBM Cloud account, you can use the same cloud account with the services that you have created. You don't need a new account. And that's it for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining.